Hey everyone, today we're looking at two different ways to make your world interactive in Unreal Engine 5. We're showcasing an automatic sliding door and comparing it to a manual interaction system for doors and light switches. First, let's look at the sliding door. This one is completely hands-free. It uses a sensor to detect when a player is nearby. When you walk into range, the sensor tells the door to open automatically. And when you leave that area, the door knows it's time to close. Next, we have a manual interaction. This rotating door doesn't open just because you're near it. It waits for you to actually do something. When I press the interact key, which I have set as the E key, the player sends a message to the door telling it to swing open. This is great for when you want the player to be more involved in the world. The best part about this manual system is that we can use it for almost anything. This light switch uses that exact same interaction message to toggle the power. By using one shared system, we can add buttons, chests, or levers to our game without having to write new code for every single object. So we have the sensor for automatic movement and an interaction interface for player-driven actions. Both are essential tools for any game developer. Now that you've seen how they work, let's jump into the blueprints and build them step by step. All right, we are going to start off by we're going to create a folder for blueprints. I already have the meshes created. They're just the door frame and the door with door socket. Just to make this simpler as far as adding the static meshes to the blueprints. So in the blueprints, let's go to blueprint class. I'm going to create an actor. And let's name this BP underscore proximity door. Proximity sliding door. All right, so we're going to open this up. Add this to here. All right. So first things first, we need to add a variable for door closed. Position. This is going to be a vector. All right. And then what we want to do is we want to set this position. Now, before we can set that, we need to add the static mesh. And this is going to be door frame static mesh. And here, search for door frame. And then we're going to add to this a static mesh. And this is going to be the actual door. So SM door. Now we want this door to be in the correct position. It starts out, as you can see, messed up. So to get it in the correct position, that's why I created this door socket. So it's just going to snap it to the socket. Going to make it simple. Just to show you how to do that. If you've got a static mesh and you open up the static mesh, you can go to sockets and you can add a socket and then position it where you want it. So in this case, I positioned the door socket where the door fits, and then you can add a preview static mesh. So I added the door so I could see that it fit correctly. So that makes it so you can select, when you go to door, you can select the parent socket as door, set that as door socket, and it snaps it into place. All right, so now that we have that set up, we're gonna get the door, and we're gonna get relative position or location. And then we're gonna set that as the door closed position. So that's gonna, on begin play, when the game starts, it's gonna get the door closed, the current position of the door, which by default is closed. It's going to set that as the door closed position. We don't need the actor begin overlap and the event tick. I'm going to delete those. And then we're going to add a door open offset. And that's going to be a vector. File, save. So the door open offset is going to be the width of the door. So we've got our door. So if you go to this, you hover over it. It doesn't show on my screen, but if you're doing this on your screen, then it should show the meshes, or the, if you're doing this on your screen, then it should show the approximate size. It says 30 by 150 by 200. So that's 30 depth, 150 width, and 200 height. So because we have 150 width, we want to make this variable public and editable on each instance. But we're going to default this to the door being 150 on the Y axis. So the door open offset is going to be 150. And that can also be changed because we're making it instance editable. We can change that. We can make adjustments to that once it's placed in the world. But for now, we're just going to set it there. Then we need to add timeline. And we're going to call this door slide timeline. And then what we want this to do is set the relative location of the door. So what that's going to do is when it updates, it's going to set the relative location of the door. So it's essentially adjusting this. So if we adjust it on the y-axis, see there, minus 150, it's opened all the way, and then 0, it's closed. So we need to adjust it by 150, which is what our door open offset is. So we need to take the door closed position and we want to linear interpolate or lerp vector between the door closed position and the door closed position minus the door open offset. So based on the alpha value between 0 and 1, 0 being the door closed position and 1 being the door closed position minus 150. So door closed position minus 150 on the y-axis, and which is the door open position. Now, that is what we're going to set our relative location to. Now, when it finishes, we want to make sure that it doesn't keep playing in forward and reverse. So we're going to stop the timeline. When it's finished, we want to stop the timeline. Now, we need to edit the timeline because we need an alpha value for the slide to adjust between the closed and the open position. So I'm going to do 0.5 for the length. So it's going to take a half a second to open and close. I'm going to add a float track, and we're going to call this slide alpha. And we're going to right click on here and add a keyframe. We're going to go 0 for the time and 0 for the value. And then we're going to add another key, and we're going to go 0.5 for the time and 1 for the value. We're going to save that, back to our event graph, and now we have our slide alpha here that we can connect into the linear interpolation for the vector. Next, we need to add a box collision called ProximityBox. And then over to the viewport, and we want to adjust this to 200. That adjusts it out a ways. This is the box that when we go into it is going to trigger the door opening and closing. So here, let's go 75, make it the full width of the door, because the door is 150 wide, so the extent is going to be 75. And then the height of the door, that one, we go 100, a total of 200 height, but we need to adjust it down by 25. Now we've got our proximity box. Now we create a custom event called open and another custom event called close. We take our proximity box and get overlapping actors. This is going to get every actor that's overlapping that proximity box. We want to filter it by first-person character, BP first-person character class, so it'll only return actors that are instances of that class. And then we want to get the length of that array and check if it is greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, it means that there's first-person character overlapping the proximity box. So that's the only time we want it to open, is when there's a first-person character overlapping the proximity box. And then we want, for the close, we only want it to close when there are no actors overlapping, no first person character actors overlapping the proximity box. So that's why we're doing equals 0 here. If it's equal to 0, there are no overlapping first person characters. So then when there is overlapping first person characters, we want to play the timeline. When there are not, we want to reverse the timeline. Because playing it opens the door, reversing it closes the door. Now, to call these functions, we need something to trigger that. So what we're going to do is, for the proximity box, we're going to add an event. We're going to add on component begin overlap. So when there is an overlap, it's going to call open. And then we're going to add an on component end overlap. And when there's an end overlap, we're going to call close. So when a first person character overlaps the proximity box, it's going to call open. Open is going to check the overlapping actors of the proximity box and make sure that there is at least one first person character. If there is, then it's going to play the open timeline. And then when we leave the proximity box, it's going to call the close event. And then it's going to check if there are any first person characters. If there are first person characters, it's going to do nothing. If there are no first person characters, it's going to play the timeline in reverse to close the door. All right, so now let's just quickly add some color. I'm going to add gray to the door frame. And then we're going to make the door blue. File save. And now we're going to add this to our level. I'm going to zero it out. I'm going to look and make sure, yep, there's light on both sides. Now we just need to bring this up. Now, when I bring it up, I can either put it at 130 on the z-axis or 120. But if I go to my grid snapping sizes, I can change that to 5. And then I can go in between and put it at 125 so it's flush with the floor. Or you can just manually type in 125. So now we've got our door in here. So if we go ahead and click play, when we walk up into the proximity sensor, in the proximity box, it opens the door. And when we walk out, it closes the door. Next, we're going to do another blueprint class actor. I'm going to name this BP underscore interaction rotating door. Open this up. File save. All right, so just like with the other one, we have to add static mesh, can be door frame. Add another static mesh, which is going to be door. Go ahead and add a collision box that we're going to call interaction box. And for the door frame, we'll go SM_door frame. And then for the door, SM_door. And then we're going to set the parent socket to the door socket. File save. Now, got door, our frame. For this one, for the frame, we're going to do a different color gray. And then for the door, we'll do a different color blue. And then for the interaction box, we're going to adjust that to 200, 75, 100. And then we're going to do the -25 to position it where the door, the open area of the door frame is. I'll save. Now, because we're doing rotation on this one, we don't need the same vectors that we needed for the slide. So for this, we can go right into adding a timeline. We're going to call this door rotate timeline. And then for this one, we're going to do linear interpolate rotator. So the original rotation is 0, and we want to rotate to -90 degrees. So here we need to add, let's change this to 0.5, add a float track. We're going to call this rotate alpha. We're going to add a key. The time is going to be 0. The value is going to be 0. Then we're going to add another key. The time is going to be 0.5 and going to be -90. Or sorry, 1, because we're doing an alpha. All right, so now for our rotate alpha, we plug that into there. And then the update is going to be set set relative rotation for the door. And then our return value from the linear interpolation is the new rotation. And then just like with the other one, we're going to do the door rotate timeline and stop. And when it's finished, we're going to call the stop to prevent it from swinging open and closed. All right. So now that is all we have to do for our timeline there. Now we need to create our events, but instead of doing a custom event with open and closed, what we need to do is create, well, we can, let's start with this. We're going to go with custom event, close, and we're going to do the same thing as with the slide. Except we're also going to add is open function. Oops. Let's go add function is open. And the output is going to be a Boolean. And then check if it's open. We're going to go door rotate timeline. And we're going to get playback position. And if it's greater than 0, that's true. And we're going to return true because the door is open if the timeline is greater than 0. Now, we're going to, so for open, we want to call we want to get the door rotate timeline, call play. And then for close, we're going to reverse. Now, I'm not putting in the check for the length of the overlapping, and I'll show you why once we get to that. But basically, because we're using interaction for this one, the only way that the interaction would be able to be called is if the player's within that proximity box. So we don't need to have that separate check. So because we're not doing the interaction box, we're not triggering it by on component begin overlap and end overlap. We're just using this to ensure that the player is inside the interaction box. So now we need an interface because we can create a custom function or custom event and call it interact. And then check is open and do a branch. And then if it is open, we call close. If it is not open, we call open, what toggles it. And then we could call that on the door. But that doesn't allow us to use that same interact with any item that we're trying to interact with. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete that. We're going to go back here and we're going to create a blueprint interface. We're going to call this BPI interaction. Now we also need to, well, first let's go in here and we're going to, for the interaction, we're going to create a function called interact. We'll go back to the interaction door. And now we need to add this interface to this interaction rotating door class. And once we've added that, now it adds this interfaces section with the interact. Now we have event interact. If you double click on that, So when interact is called on the interface, it's going to check if it's open, and then if it is open, it's going to close it. If it's not open, it's going to open it. So now, how do we call that interact to tell the door what to do? Well, we need to go to the first person character. So if you go to first person blueprints, first person character, and then in here, we need to have a trigger key, an interaction key. So we want to set it as the E key. But with the enhanced input actions, you can do IA and then the action. Right now we don't have one. So let's go to input and go to action. And we're going to go to right click, go to input, input action. I'm going to call this IA interact. All right. And now we need to add that into our input mapping context. So in here under mappings, if it's not open, just toggle the drop down to open mappings under default key mappings. And then we're going to click the plus next to mappings to add a new one. And we're going to go IA interact. Now we have to set a key. So if you click on the keyboard and press the E key, it's going to set the E key to that mapping. So now whenever we press the E key, it's going to trigger the IA interact. So now we go back to our first person character. You right click, type in IA underscore interact, and now we have this. So triggered is depending on the type of input action. It can do different things depending on how it's set up. Triggered in the default state, it is a continuous check where if it's triggered, if the key is held down, then it's going to continually trigger that. Started only triggers once. So we're going to use started. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can all right, so there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can either do a line trace or we can do proximity interaction, which is what we set up the rotating door for with the interaction box. So if we want to do, well, we'll do both. We're going to add in a Boolean here just to switch between it. We're going to call it use line trace file. All right, and then drag that in. Oh, just so you know, if you drag and hold control and then release, it automatically selects the get here. If you drag and hold alt, it automatically selects the set. So it's an easier way if you know what you're trying to do. So we're going to get and create a branch. And we're going to go from started to there. So if we're doing a line trace, this is going to be line trace interaction. And this is going to be proximity interaction. All right. So for the line trace interaction, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can just do you can do the line trace from the character mesh. What I prefer to do is get the mesh and then get bone transform and then use the head bone. And the reason I say that is because we open up the skeletal mesh, go to the skeleton, roll down, somewhere here, the head, oh, neck, head. So the head comes out of here instead of just like the center of the mesh. It'll come out of the head, so it's like you're actually looking at the where you're doing the interaction. So I do the head, and then from there I break transform. You get the location. Then from here, we need to do a line trace by channel. The start location is going to be that location of the head bone. And then the end location, we need to get the first person camera, get world rotation, and then get the forward vector of the world rotation. Then we want to multiply this by the distance that you want it to interact with. So 500 centimeters or 5 meters. And then we're going to add that to the location of the head. And then that's going to be where it ends. And then just so we can see this, we're going to do the debug is going to be for duration, and we're going to do for 3 seconds. And then if we hit something, we're going to break the hit result. And then in here, we've got hit actor. So if we hit an actor, then we can just call interact on BPI interaction, which is the blueprint interface we made. So it'll call it on that actor. So let's go ahead and add the rotating door in. So we're going to go back over to blueprints, interaction, rotating door. Zero to center that. Bring this up. Okay. Go. All right. Now let's play. That's the proximity. All right. So we are hitting, but it's not doing anything. Let's look at why. So if we go to here, and we look at this. Okay, so if you've been following along, yours should be working just fine. Mine, I had some other doors from testing in here that was blocking the line trace for the interaction. So now that I removed those, I go through here it does the interaction. So the problem with this is right now, once the door's open, I'm no longer hitting it to interact with it. I have to aim towards the door or the door frame or part of that actor to be able to close it. A way around that is if we use this interaction box right here, we can either, for the line trace, we can change this from overlap all dynamic to custom and then do block visibility. So now when we play it, it hits that interaction box and recognizes that as part of the door. And then we can use it like that. Another way to do it that I like a little better is using the interaction box instead of doing a line trace each time. We use the proximity interaction. And we're going to go with the capsule component. We're going to get that. Get overlapping actors. We're going to check so we can check all of them and do a for each loop. I'm going to do a for each loop with break. Go ahead and change this to not use line trace. We're going to do a for each loop with break. So it's going to go through each overlapping actor. And we're going to check, does the object implement an interface? If it implements an interactable, or if it implements the BPI interaction interface, then on that actor, we're going to call interact using the interface. And then if it does, we're just going to wrap this around here and we're going to break out of this for loop because we already found what we're trying to interact with. And if we only want it to interact with one thing at a time, we don't want it interacting with multiple different things at one time. All right. So now the way that this works is it's no longer doing line trace. We have to be within the interaction box, and then when we hit the E key, then it sends that interact signal. And so depending on how, what you're doing in your game, it may be beneficial to just use the interaction box for that type of interaction. Or the line trace might be the better option for you. It's going to depend on your specific use case. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to show you the light switch. So I want to, now that we have this BPI interaction created, we're going to create a blueprint class. actor VP underscore light switch. What's up? We're going to add static mesh, switch base, add static mesh, switch lever. All right, so the switch base, we're just going to do SM switch base. Switch lever is going to be SM switch. So if we zoom in here, now for this, we're going to go to the lever socket, file save. We've got it set to on by default. So if we go, let's change this to gray. And then for the switch, let's go with blue on this one. So this is what our switch is going to look like. Now, we're going to add a variable, and this is going to be light to control. This is going to, we're just going to set this to a point light. All right. Now in the event graph, oh, actually, first we need to go to the class settings. We're going to add the BPI interaction interface. Now we have this interact, and we're going to add toggle light function. All right, so we're just going to call the toggle light function when it's interacted with. And then in the toggle light function, I'm going to go light to control. I'm going to get that. I'm going to get the light component. And we're going to toggle visibility. Now that's going to do the actual toggling of the light. On and off. And then for the switch lever, we want to set the relative rotation. And we want to get relative rotation from it. And we want to delta rotate it on the x-axis by 180 degrees. And then this is going to rotate the switch lever to indicate on slash. Okay. Now let's go back to our level. And we're gonna add the light switch. Add the light switch over here. So right now the light switch is rotated correctly, so we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. And then I'm going to put this into the wall. Okay. And now this is what our switch looks like in the on position. So what we do here is this light is last room light, is the name of this light. So we're going to go to here. Let's go back to the switch. We need to make this public and editable on each instance. And now, when we go to here, we've got light to control. We can choose last room light. Now, when we play, open this door with the interact. Now we go over to this light switch. Whoop, I forgot. Because we're not using the line trace, we are using proximity. We need to add a box collision. Maybe interaction box. Now, this now we've got that in there. Now, if we go over, when we're inside the interaction box, light turns on and off. So we're using that same interaction interface to tell the door to open and close and to tell the light switch to turn on and off. So that's how you use interfaces and collision boxes to sense whether an actor is within the collision box or proximity sensor, and to use interfaces to control interactions between multiple different devices without having to write the same logic multiple times for different objects. And it decouples the logic so that way the light switch isn't reliant on the player and the player isn't reliant on the light switch. So that's going to be all for this video. If you guys have any questions, please leave comments. If this video helped, if you liked it, please subscribe and like the video. That helps me out. And I will see you guys in the next video.